Hello, Saskia, devotional goddess here. How are you all doing? This morning I had my mammogram and ultrasound. As many of you may know, in 2021 and 2022, I went through breast cancer. It was chemo, it was radiation. Well, it was chemo, surgery, and radiation. So going back, even for an ultrasound and a mammogram, it really brought up emotions for me. Being in the hospital again, and I was surprisingly weepy. And as I honored it, I was like, you're not going to push this down. The more I honor that release and the presence of the emotion, the more I can move through it and allow it to be honored. It's when we suppress our emotions and we push them down, but like, no, don't want to deal with this. They bubble up inside. And as that suppressing accumulates, it can come out in more emotionally explosive ways, because it's like that kettle that needs to release. Or it can come up in disease and misalignment of energy that creates blockages, and through the blockages of the energy, dis-ease begins to form and take hold. And I did my yoga there, literally physically in some of the postures that I took in the waiting room, and also just placing my feet on the floor, feeling my buttock bones and the seat of the chair, closing my eyes and dropping into my breath. There were times where I just allowed the tears to roll down my face, and there were times where I could harness the energy and allow that to move through in another way other than tears. So I did the dance internally. And there was a low coffee table. And at one point I just stood up and did my forward fold. And I rested my hands on the floor, and my forehead rested perfectly on that coffee table. Resting our forehead helps to still the mind. They're called vrittis. Vrittis are the emotional state, that disruptive chatter that's, darting everywhere in the mind and always on the go. Those are your vrittis. Such a great word, isn't it? And resting the forehead helps to calm the mind, and it helps to calm the vrittis of the mind. So I just stood there in my forward fold. Forehead on the coffee table. My hamstrings are open enough that I can just let my hands rest onto the floor with my arms extended downwards. And I just closed my eyes and I just connected to my breath. When my name was called up and I went to get changed, you put that gown on, could keep my trousers on, but had to take my top off. And again, the waves came up, and I just, rather than sitting in a chair, I was like, no, I want to sit on the floor. So I just sat on the floor in cross-legged Sukhasana, sometimes forward folding, stretching into my hips. I needed to be connected to my body. I needed to be in my body so that the trauma didn't make me leave and check out. So I came into my postures. I came into movement subtly, not, invasively to anybody else's space, but I did what I needed. First I had the mammogram, which honestly, ladies, doesn't it just feel barbaric with all the technology that we have? That we have to mash our boobs into 2 plates? I see both sides of it, that the system is set up in such a way, so we're just going to keep it like the status quo, because you can't, everything's so entrenched in the system that they can't necessarily turn it around, and so much money and time and resources are invested in doing it this way. But oh my goodness, it's just such an assault on your body in subtle ways and in gross ways, you know. The lady, the technician I worked with, was a love. They 99% of the time are. She was really sweet. She held my emotion with compassion and understanding. And just as I was allowing it to flow through, you know, it naturally stopped, and I could be tear-free, if you will. And then suddenly, out the blue, they can come back. And then again, as I was, you know, being maneuvered in and around the machine, again, there was a release, and the tears, I just let them roll down my cheeks. Back into the waiting room. The feeling that I really wanted, I just wanted to curl up in a ball and have a good sob and just let it out. But I was like, yeah, that I can't do here. That's a real private thing to do. But again, I sat on the floor. This time it was Upavista Konasana with the legs extended out to the side. There were only 2 other ladies in the room, and it was a comfortable enough size room that me stretching out my legs wasn't in the way of anybody else to trip over, right? One foot's under a chair and the other foot's in line with my chair. So I didn't encroach on anybody else's space. But I needed to be grounded. And to be grounded, stretching my legs out to the side, rooting into my heels, calves, thighs, buttock bones. It was a good circumference of my body in contact with the earth. And that helped me to self-regulate. I was forward folded with my elbows on the floor, and then again resting my forehead so that I could have grounding and steadiness of my mind as well as my body. When the second technician came in, she was like, oh, that's interesting. And it wasn't in a very nice way, I have to say. But I didn't care. I was like, you know what? I don't need to explain myself. I did think about it for a moment of like, shall I explain what I'm doing? I'm like, no, there's no need. You are self-regulating. I'm sure, it's clear she hasn't seen that before. The average person doesn't come in and do their yoga poses, but this is my toolkit. And this is what helped me to move through this scenario and help me process another layer of grief and trauma and whatever else was being processed that I don't necessarily need to know the finer details as to what was being moved within my body. I just know that in that journey, in that moment, I was honoring what was coming up and I was allowing it to be present. And then I had the conversation after 5 or 10 minutes. Once I was lying on the bed, she had done the right breast already and she was moving into the left, which is where my cancer was. And by that point, I'd processed the emotions and I was back in my center and I was contained and steady and stable in my own being. And that's where the conversation unfolded of, looking at my left breast. They took fat from my back because the surgeon initially said, we want to take your breast. And I was not prepared for that. And I was like, no, you have to give me another option. No. It hadn't even occurred to me that would be a possibility when after the chemo and when they were going to remove what was left of the lump and any other cancer cells. So for me, I chose to keep my breast, but it did mean they needed to take make a large incision in my back to take the fat. And of course, after chemo treatment, there isn't much fat to be had. And they took out a significant amount of my breast. So there's a large scar on my back to fill up the hole in my breast. But due to the scarring and gravity taking over, obviously this breast looks different. And it's me needing to relearn what is my new normal with this breast, even though it was 3 years ago, the surgery in April it was 3 years ago. It's still new in my lifespan, and I'm still coming to understand what scar tissue is, what flesh is, how it's different, so that I know what an anomaly would be should it ever surface, which I don't believe it would, but it's still important for me to understand and have a comprehension of what the structure is now of this left breast, as it's different from the right and different from what I used to know. So it was a very informative, interesting conversation that I got to have with the technician there. It was very sweet. But it is honoring the grief, honoring the journey, honoring the transitions, and the anniversaries that come up, and beginning to witness the anniversaries and neutralize any charges that are attached to the anniversaries, so that there isn't this, oh, this is my anniversary, I'm going to cry, or this is the anniversary, this is always a terrible day. It's like, no, I want to neutralize it. So yes, there is an honoring of that journey and an honoring of that anniversary, but there isn't a charge with it, because that can carry over unless we cognitively, with awareness, recognize it and make changes. Choose another way. Choose another way in which you're perceiving it, witnessing it, thinking about it. And that will change the energy of the day itself, so that it doesn't copy and paste every year and resurface every year. This weekend, as part of the 200-hour yoga teacher training, I taught the women's health segment, which is always so rich, and there's always so much to share in that. And I so enjoy it. And we were talking about our health and honoring the cycles of a woman. And I will do a workshop on it, because there's so much to share, that, and to bring in language that we don't have around our menses. There isn't a holistic, a spiritual perspective around our menses so much in society, or our pregnancies, or our postpartums, or our menopause. And they are all milestones and rites of passage, that when we have a larger lens with which to witness them, it can really give us more empowerment, rather than adding more fear or seeing ourselves as being weaker or not able. And it's important to share. So there'll be more on that in the future. All right, my loves, thank you so much for visiting today. Feel free to share in the comments if you can relate and if this was helpful. And all my information, as ever, is below if you wish to work with me one-on-one. And please like and have a wonderful day. Many, many blessings.